Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
All aboard! All aboard!
The first round of the college football playoff delivered thrilling on-campus action. Notre Dame made history with its first ever playoff win, defeating Indiana 27-17 in snowy South Bend behind Jeremiah Love's record-setting 98-yard touchdown run. Penn State dominated SMU 38-10, fueled by a stifling defense that scored 2 defensive touchdowns early in the game. Texas held off a spirited Clemson comeback, leaning on Jaden Blue's 146 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to secure a 38-24 victory. Ohio State made a statement with a commanding 42-17 win over Tennessee, as Will Howard threw for 311 yards, and the Buckeyes' defense controlled the game from start to finish. The first round of the expanded college football playoff delivered unforgettable moments, but the journey is far from over. The quarterfinals now move to traditional postseason venues: the Rose Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Sugar Bowl, and Peach Bowl, with 8 teams still vying for the national championship. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP. For more information, you can check out our newly designed website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com. And now let me send you over to the studio and our host, Summer, for the big show.
Well, it's the big show. Yes, it's a big show tonight.
Welcome to the big show. We've reached the quarterfinals of the college football playoffs, and we've got 4 incredible games on the slate. Joining me to break it all down are my fantastic co-hosts, Jessica, Billy, and Kenneth. Here's how today's show is set up. Jessica will provide you with all the latest updates for these matchups, and with 3 games in a dome and the other in beautiful Pasadena, weather won't be a factor like it was during the first round. Billy, our senior handicapping analyst, will dive into the opening lines and where the market currently sits. And finally, for the most detailed breakdowns anywhere, our founder and senior analyst, Kenneth, will give you his expert insights and highlight the players to watch in each game. Here's the lineup for the quarterfinals. The Fiesta Bowl from Glendale, Arizona, Penn State versus Boise State. The Sugar Bowl from New Orleans, Louisiana, Notre Dame versus Georgia. The Peach Bowl from Atlanta, Georgia, Texas versus Arizona State. And the Rose Bowl from Pasadena, California, Ohio State versus Oregon. Welcome to the big show. This is where champions are made. And now, let me welcome in my fantastic co-host, Jessica, for all the latest news. Take it away, Jessica.
Thank you, Summer. Weather won't be an issue this week, with 3 of our 4 games being played in climate-controlled conditions and the weather for the Rose Bowl in Pasadena being picture perfect. However, we do have some injuries to report that could play a major role in this week's matchups. Let's go game by game with the kickoff times included. Kicking off the quarterfinal action, Penn State takes on Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl at 6:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve. No significant injuries to report for either team, so both sides are expected to be at full strength heading into this matchup. The Peach Bowl kicks off the New Year's Day action at 12 p.m. as Texas takes on Arizona State. The Sun Devils will be without their most productive wide receiver, Jordan Tyson, who has been a major contributor all season with 75 catches, 1,101 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Without Tyson, Texas is expected to load up against the run and force Arizona State into a one-dimensional game plan. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena kicks off at 4 p.m. on New Year's Day, featuring Ohio State and Oregon. With picture-perfect weather, both teams are expected to be at full strength, and this game is shaping up to be a classic. The Sugar Bowl features Notre Dame and Georgia with a 7:30 p.m. kickoff on New Year's Day. Georgia will be without their starting quarterback, Carson Beck, who suffered an elbow injury in the SEC championship game against Texas. Beck has undergone successful surgery and will now prepare for the NFL, leaving the Bulldogs with a big question at quarterback. For Notre Dame, they'll be missing their All-American candidate at defensive tackle, Riley Mills, due to a significant knee injury. The pressure falls on Howard Cross, who is just returning after missing nearly 2 months with his own injury. Notre Dame's depth on the defensive line will face a tough test in this matchup. And that's the latest on weather and injury updates for this week's quarterfinal games. Now, let me send it over to Billy for the best insights from a betting perspective. Take it away, Billy.
Thanks, Jessica. Let's dive into the betting lines and see how the action has evolved for these 4 quarterfinal matchups. I'll break down the opening lines, how the market has shifted, and where the public and sharps are putting their money. We'll start with the Fiesta Bowl, where Penn State opened as a 10-point favorite against Boise State. Early action was fairly split, with Penn State drawing 49% of the handle and 36% of the bets, while Boise State had 51% of the handle and 64% of the bets. Now the line has moved to Penn State favored by 11, with the Nittany Lions pulling in 56% of the handle and 45% of the bets. Boise State's numbers have flipped, holding 44% of the handle and 55% of the bets. The movement suggests larger wagers are coming in on Penn State, while Boise State still holds more public interest. In the Peach Bowl, Texas opened as a 13.5-point favorite against Arizona State, and that number has held steady. Initially, the Longhorns drew 49% of the handle and 45% of the bets, while Arizona State saw 51% of the handle and 55% of the bets. Currently, Texas has gained some support, with 54% of the handle and 52% of the bets, while Arizona State has dropped to 46% of the handle and 48% of the bets. This slight shift suggests the public and sharps are leaning more toward Texas to cover. Next, in the Sugar Bowl, Georgia opened as a 1-point underdog against Notre Dame, but now the line has since moved to the Bulldogs being a 2-point favorite. Early on, Georgia dominated the action, pulling in 88% of the handle and 81% of the bets, while Notre Dame held just 12% of the handle and 19% of the bets. Even with the line movement, Georgia remains a heavy favorite in the market, now commanding 85% of the handle and 74% of the bets, while Notre Dame has ticked up slightly to 15% of the handle and 26% of the bets. And finally, the Rose Bowl matchup between Ohio State and Oregon has been one of the closest on the board. Ohio State opened as a 2.5-point favorite, drawing 55% of the handle and 43% of the bets, while Oregon had 45% of the handle and 57% of the bets. At the current line of Ohio State favored by 2.5, the Buckeyes have gained a bit more support, holding 58% of the handle and 40% of the bets, while Oregon now has 42% of the handle and 60% of the bets. The betting split suggests public money is favoring Oregon, but the larger wagers are leaning toward Ohio State. So as we head into these quarterfinal matchups, we're seeing some significant support for favorites like Georgia and Penn State, while public sentiment is still heavily backing teams like Oregon and Boise State to cover. It'll be fascinating to see how these numbers shift as we get closer to kickoff. Now, let's send it back to you, Summer.
Thanks, Billy, and as always, shop for the best number. And now, folks, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. We're bringing in the man, the myth, the legend, the voodoo child himself, Kenneth. When it comes to breaking down matchups, nobody does it better. So sit back, relax, and let Kenneth work his magic. Cue up a little Jimi Hendrix, because it's time for the best breakdowns in the business. Kenneth, take it away.
And welcome in to another playoff edition of the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Folks, this is the Crunch Time Express. Let's just get down to work because my team has done a fantastic job setting the scenes for you in these 4 quarterfinal matchups. Let's go ahead and get to the breakdown. And we're going to start there on Tuesday night with the big matchup between Penn State and Boise State. And what I'm seeing from this matchup, and let's go ahead and get that up on the board here, is a matchup that may be a little bit deceiving. So let's go ahead and get into the breakdown here because a lot of things to cover in this ball game. We got 4 of them. Let's get to it. You are looking live, to quote my great mentor, Brent Musburger, as the Penn State Nittany Lions travel to the desert to take on Boise State. The Fiesta Bowl sets up an exciting clash between Penn State and Boise State. Both teams bring in strong rushing attacks, disciplined play, and a unique strength on each side of the ball. Penn State's physical style faces off against Boise State's high-powered offense led by the Heisman Trophy runner-up, Aston Genty. Penn State comes into this game as our 9th overall ranked team and 23rd overall rated offense, while Boise State is the 7th best overall team for us, and they come in with this matchup with the 59th rated defense. On the other side of this matchup, Boise State's offense is the 6th rated offense overall for us. They will be facing a top 20 Penn State defense. What's at stake? Quite simple. A trip to the college football playoff semifinals here in about 2 weeks. So let's get to the key offensive metrics for both teams, and then we'll get into how each coach, and when I say coach, I'm not just talking about the head coach, I'm talking about the head coach and both coordinators for both teams. I'm going to be highlighting all 8 coordinators in these 4 breakdowns coming up. So let's start right there with the Penn State Nittany Lion offense. Penn State's offense come in with an adjusted points per game at 28.8 points per game. Folks, that's 48th best in our metrics. They come in averaging 240 yards passing, 38th best, also 38th with a rushing attack that averages 188 yards on the ground. They're going to be facing this Boise State defense that allows 25.1 adjusted points per game, 68th in the nation, 257 yards of passing offense, 118th. But where they are a lot better on defense is their rushing game. Their rushing attack on defense allows only 133 yards per game on the ground. That's 30th in the nation. Let's flip the matchup over. Boise State comes in averaging 34.2 adjusted points per game, 15th best in the nation. Their passing game, 196 yards through the air, 89th in the nation. But folks, where they get it done is on the ground. 234 adjusted rushing yards per game. That's 7th best in the nation. They're going to be going up against a Penn State stop unit that allows 17.4 adjusted points per game. That's 19th best in the country. 156 yards allowed passing. That's 6th best in the nation. But Penn State has shown the ability to give up a lot of rushing yards. 141 yards allowed on the ground per game adjusted. 41st in the nation. So there's some intrigue in this matchup for us, and around these parts, we like interesting. So let's talk about the quarterbacks in this matchup, because everything always starts with the quarterback position, whether it's high school football, college football, or the National Football League. So let's take a look at both quarterbacks in this matchup. For Penn State, quarterback Drew Allar, 237 completions, 346 attempts. He's completing about 68.5% completion percentage there for 3,021 yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 INTs. That ratio is not where we want our quarterbacks to be at, especially in a high-stake poker match like we're going to find here in the quarterfinals. He's averaging 8.7 yards per pass attempt. When we adjust that out per pass attempt, when we remove out the sack yardage and all of that, he's right at 9. That's about where we expect our quarterbacks at that are still playing in the playoffs. That's about where we expect quarterbacks to be. He's averaging 12.7 yards per completion, We'll talk about his primary targets here in just a moment. 216 yards passing per game with a quarterback rating of 157.8. So solid job there out of Drew Allar on the season. What's going to be the challenge for him and offensive coordinator Andy Koenecke? We've talked about him all year long. The former offensive coordinator for the Kansas Jayhawks, Rock Chalk Jayhawk KU. The biggest challenge for Allar in this game is he must exploit the Boise State secondary while protecting the ball against a very turnover-prone defense. Now for Boise State, let's talk about their quarterback, Maddox Matson. Boy, tried saying that 3 times fast. On the season, this young man is completing 62% of his passes, 224 completions, 361 attempts, 22 touchdowns, only 3 INTs. That INT percentage for that young man, 0.8% of his passes end up being intercepted. When you got a touchdown to INT ratio like that, that's what we come to expect, especially when you got a big-time running back. You want to make sure that you're not turning the ball over, giving that big horse in the backfield as many opportunities as you can. His yards per pass attempt, only 7.5. However, when we look at his yards per completions, he's right on par there with Drew Allar, completing 12.1 yards per passing attempt. He's averaging about 209 yards passing per game. Like I said, not too far off from where Allar is in his quarterback rating, 143.6. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Maddox Matson is a very capable quarterback, and they're going to need him in this ball game. And when we think about their offensive coordinator, Dirk Cutter, what is he going to need to do in this ball game to help out his quarterback? Well, the first thing he's got to do is make sure that Maddox Matson needs to manage the game efficiently. You got to use a lot of play action passing in this ball game. That's going to later open up some of those rushing lanes for Aston Genty. So what I want to see from this team early on in the ball game and early on in down situations, throw that Penn State a little play action, get their eye discipline off of Genty and open up some of those wide receivers. It doesn't have to be for big pass plays as far as yards per play goes. It just has to keep the sticks moving in this ball game. Folks, let's not waste any time. Let's get to the key players here for both teams in this matchup. Let's start with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Their top 3 rushers, and really we're going to highlight those 2 talented running backs. One, Nicholas Singleton, 145 carries, 928 yards rushing. Folks, 6.4 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns. He's joined in the backfield by his fantastic running mate, Katron Allen, 184 carries on the season, 892 yards rushing, 4.8 yards per carry. He also has 8 rushing touchdowns. Also going to throw in the legs of quarterback Drew Allar, 79 carries, 289 yards rushing, 6 rushing touchdowns. Folks, Boise State, let's go right to the big man in Aston Genty, 344 carries. You want to talk about a workhorse? Look up the definition in college football this year. You'll see that young man's picture there. 2,497 yards rushing, 7.3 yards per carry, 29 rushing touchdowns. He knows how to find the end zone, and expect if Boise State is to move on in this ball game, he may find the paint a couple of times in this ball game. Also going to throw in the legs of their quarterback, Maddox Matson, 50 carries, 224 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. Going to need a big game from that quarterback using his arm, his brain, and his legs in this ball game. When we talk about the top 3 receiving targets for Drew Allar, we're going to start there with Folks, the second best tight end in all of college football and the best tight end still remaining in these playoffs, that is one Tyler Warren. On the season, this young man has 92 receptions, 1,095 yards, 11.9 yards per reception, 6 receiving touchdowns. He's averaging about 78 yards receiving per game. The next 2 targets, Harrison Wallace III, 43 receptions, 686 yards receiving, 16 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns, averages about 53 yards through the air. And then finally, Omar Evans, 19 receptions, 360 yards receiving, 18.9 yards per receptions, 4 touchdowns, but that big 25.7 yards per play will need to be increased in this ball game. You're going to need another weapon in this matchup, I do believe here, because I think the defensive coordinator for Boise State, Eric Chenadar, is going to devise up a scheme here to kind of take away that number one threat in Warren. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Speaking of receivers that got to step up in this ball game, Boise State, your top 3 wide receivers have all got to step up. Cam Camper, 55 receptions, 837 yards receiving, 15.2 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. He averages about 64 yards per game. Up next, Matt Lauder, 43 receptions, 523 yards, 12.2 yards per reception, 6 touchdowns. He averages about 40 yards per game. And then finally, Latrell Caples, 34 receptions, 443 yards receiving, 13 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns, averages about 40 yards per reception. You're going to need all of these guys to pretty much hit their averages, and then one of them kind of give you close to that 80 to 90 yard receiving mark in this contest. As always, the key factors for me in this ball game, and we got 3 of them here. Aston Genty's dominance. Jenny's record-breaking season there for the Boise State Broncos as he smashed all of their single-season records. Can he give Boise State a significant edge on the ground? Or will Penn State's defense find a way to do what no other team in college football has done this year and slow him down? The next key for me, it's always the turnover differential. And when you look at the turnover differential for both of these teams, big advantage there to Boise State as they're +8 in the turnover differential, while Penn State is only a +3 this year. Both teams do a fantastic job of not committing a lot of penalties. Both teams commit less than 5 penalties per game and are flagged for less than 45 yards in penalty yardage per game. That is a phenomenal job here. I'm going to highlight one more thing here for you as well, and that is the kicking game. Penn State's making about 66% of their field goal attempts. Boise State, in that climate control condition, makes 81%. That could be an advantage there for Boise State in this matchup. And then finally, how good can you be converting your drives into touchdowns in this ball game? When we take a look at it, Boise State drives ending with a touchdown. I'm not even going to talk about score. I'm just really going to focus on touchdowns here because I think it's going to take touchdowns to win this game. Both teams end drives with touchdowns at a really good rate. But I want you to key in on this for me. Boise State drives ending with a touchdown, let's round it up to 42%. Penn State, 36%. Now, let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball here. Boise State's defense allows their opponents to convert touchdowns at a 28%. Penn State, only 17. I know we like to focus a lot on drives ending with scores. I think you're going to need touchdowns in this ball game. Whichever offense can end drives with touchdowns, the best in this ball game, will likely be moving on to the semifinals. Let's get to the coaching breakdown here. Let's start with James Franklin. Since the beginning of last season, Franklin is 22-4. Let's round it up to 85% win rate against games that are one-score games. He's had 6 of them. He's 3-3 in those contests. And against quality opponents, over the last now 2 full years, he's 9-4 against quality opponents. That's about a little less than 70%. Now, let's talk about how aggressive under this new offensive coordinator Penn State is this year. Penn State is going for it on 4th downs about 14.5% of the time. That ranks 60th in the nation. Their conversion rate, however, is 76%. So when they go for it on 4th downs, they are pretty successful at that. Now, let's talk about Spencer Danielson, Boise State head coach. Took over very late in the season last year as the interim head coach, got that interim tag removed, and now is the head coach for Boise State. Folks, this man has 1 loss on his resume, and that's a 1-point loss to the number 1 team in the nation in Oregon, 15-1. That's a 94% hit rate as far as winning ball games. In 1-score games, he's 4-1. And his record against quality opponents, 6-1. Now, I want you to take notes of this right here. His decisions to go for it on 4th down, not too much different from Penn State. They're going for it about 14.9% of the time. That's 53rd in the nation. Their 4th down conversion rate is 71%. So not quite as good as Penn State, but make no mistake, if you're going for it and you're converting at a 70% clip, you're not only making the right decisions, but you also have the right play called and you're getting the right play execution. All right, let's talk about 4th down coaching adjustments for both teams in this matchup. For James Franklin, he should maintain his approach. And the reason for that is not only his team's success for going for it on 4th downs, I talked about it, 76%. Boise State's opponents have attempted 38 4th down attempts. They've converted 19 of them. Now, with that, you're looking at a conversion rate of 50%. If I'm Franklin, I just maintain the same strategy I've had all season long when going for it on 4th down. Spencer Danielson for Boise State. In this ball game, I know that you don't like to be overly aggressive. In this ball game, I'm going to suggest that you increase the aggressiveness going for it on 4th downs. Boise State, you're absolutely phenomenal converting on 4th downs, 15 conversions, 21 attempts. We talked about it, 71% conversion rate. But here's another big factor. Penn State's opponents are absolutely money when they go for it on 4th downs. 24 attempts, 15 conversions. 63% of the time Penn State's opponents go for it on 4th downs, they convert. Folks, I am absolutely going to make Penn State defend me for 4 downs if I'm near the 50-yard line moving in. Like I said, you got to finish drive with points, but the more times that you can finish with a touchdown, the better opportunity you give yourself in this ball game if you're Boise State. We've already talked about the betting lines, folks. As we're recording this, I'm looking at a updated line where Penn State is favored by 11. 59% of the handle, 44% of the money. All right. And when we look at our Monte Carlo simulations, where we run 10,000 game simulations for all of these games, folks, I like where our number sits for this matchup quite a bit. Let's give some final thoughts here as we get ready to move on. We talked about it in round 1. 3rd down conversions, key to winning ball games. Let's take a look at where Boise State is on 3rd downs. Boise State converts 3rd downs at 45%. Penn State converts at 43%. So both teams are actually very solid on converting on 3rd downs. Whoever wins that battle, along with the turnover battle, will be the winner of this ball game. Just some final thoughts on this matchup. This matchup is poised to go well into the second half, being a very competitive ball game. I think if Boise State is able to get that explosive rushing attack going, and with an opportunistic defense, could challenge Penn State's physicality. We'll see if Penn State's balanced offense and experienced roster give them a slight edge in this matchup. We've talked about the offensive and defensive coordinators. I failed to mention Penn State's defensive coordinator, Tom Allen. What will be his game plan against Aston Genty? It must be, you got to force Boise State into a passing game early on. So expect Penn State to load the box in this ball game. That's why I mentioned you got to give them some play action passing in this contest. For Boise State, it's imperative that you force Penn State to beat you left-handed. Folks, Tyler Warren cannot go off in this ball game. If he does, Boise State's going to be in trouble early and often, because then you're going to get a double dose of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in this ball game. So what you got to do if you're Boise State, you got to go to what we used to call in a basketball reference, a box and one defense, where you're manning up their best player and then the other 4 guys are playing zone. The key to that defense is you will always have 2 sets of eyes on Tyler Warren, the linebacker that's covering him, and then, or the nickelback in some cases, but for this case, you want a bigger body covering him in the linebacker, and then you got a safety over the top. You're going to bracket coverage, and then you're going to tell your corners, hey, guys, you're playing cat coverage all night long. And what cat coverage is, basically, it's you got no help. Wherever your wide receiver goes, that's where you're going to go. And then your other safety, who's not going to be matched up with Warren, he's going to be your other defender in the box, because you're going to lose that linebacker in the box. So you got to replace him with that safety. So it doesn't mean that you have to walk him down into the box. What it means is he's got to be ready to fly down if one of those running backs get past the first level and up to the second level. So that's going to be the key for me in this matchup between Penn State and Boise State. Folks, let's get on to our next matchup. And that's where we're going to head down to the Peach Bowl. beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, not only home of the SEC championship game, which Texas just played in, but now hosting the college football playoffs quarterfinals Peach Bowl. Let's get to the matchup here. The Peach Bowl sets up to be a very compelling showdown between the Texas Longhorns and the Arizona State Sun Devils. Both teams enter the playoffs with elite offenses and disciplined play styles. But they feature very different strengths on each side of the ball. Texas boasts a balanced attack led by quarterback Quinn Ewers, while Arizona State leans heavy on their running game led by Cam Scatterboo. However, Arizona State's passing attack will be significantly hampered by the absence of star wideout Jordan Tyson, who led the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Texas comes into this game as our 5th overall ranked team and sixth with the 6th best overall offense. They'll be going up against an Arizona State Sun Devil defense that is one of our better teams on defense. We'll see if they can match up well against this Texas Longhorn offense in this matchup. We've talked about it. What's at stake? The college football semifinals here in about a couple of weeks. So let's get to the key metrics for both teams in this matchup. And we're going to start with the Longhorns. They come in averaging 38.8 adjusted points per game, 6th best in the nation. We talk about the balance on offense, 277 yards passing, 14th in the nation, 197 on the ground, 29th best in that metric. They're going to be facing an Arizona State Sun Devil defense that has been very stingy to their opponents. 18 points per game allowed when we adjust that out. 24th best in the nation. This passing attack for the Sun Devils only allow 181 yards passing per game. That's 29th. And when you talk about a stop unit as far as being able to shut down the run game, nobody does it better except one team than the Sun Devils. The Sun Devils allow their opponents 107 yards per game on the ground, 2nd best in the nation. Now let's talk about that Sun Devil offense. They come in with an adjusted points per game, 31.4, 28th best in the nation. Passing game, 226 yards through the air, 56. We talk about the big man that they're missing in Jordan Tyson. Their run game, 207 yards per game on the ground, adjusted. That is 19th best. They're going up against a Texas stop unit that has just been snatching milk out of babies' bottles and dating your younger sister without permission. 11 points per game allowed, 2nd best in the country. They have the best passing defense in the nation, only allowing 132 yards through the air, and their rush defense just as stifling, 110 yards per game on the ground. That's 5th best in the nation. Let's get to the quarterback matchup because I find this to be quite compelling in this contest. Let's start with Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers. Quinn on the season, 250 completions, 376 attempts, completing 66% of his passes, 2,867 yards through the air, 26 touchdowns, but 10 INTs. Do not like that touchdown to INT ratio at all. 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Folks, with the kind of weapons that Ewers and Texas have, and with the offensive-minded head coach like Steve Sarkisian, for that number to be that low, it is quite shocking. 11.5 yards per completion. That's telling me you're not getting a lot of big time chunk plays through the air. Once again, that is very surprising. 239 yards per game through the air. Quarterback rating of 148. We have thoughts. For Arizona State, Sam Levitt. And Sam, you got to live and let die in this ball game. 192 completions, 304 attempts, completing 63% of his passes, 2,263 yards, 24 touchdowns. But this is what I love. Only 5 INTs. Got thoughts. 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Like I've always said, 8.5 is the minimum. And he's slightly above that where Ewers is not. Yards per completions, 13.9 yards per completion. So with less big time weapons to throw to, he's almost 2.5 yards per completion better than Quinn Ewers. Keep that in mind in this ball game. 222 yards per game passing with a passer rating of 159.5. All right, let's talk about it here. And let's start with Texas's offensive coordinator, Kyle Flood, as he's going to be matching with Arizona State Sun Devil defensive coordinator, Brian Ward, in this matchup. What does Kyle Flood need to do to help out his quarterback in this ball game? Well, he must make sure that Ewers stays on schedule, maintains efficiency, and somehow avoid turnovers against this Arizona State defense that excels in stopping the run and could force Texas into putting the ball in the air more than they want to in this ball game, which may be an advantage for Arizona State. Now, let's talk about Arizona State's offensive coordinator, Marcus Arroyo, and he's going up against Texas defensive coordinator, Pete Kowakowski. What does Marcus need to do in this ball game to help out his extremely young quarterback? He's got to make sure that in the absence of Jordan Tyson, and they've only played a couple of games without Tyson, you can't just lean on Cam Scatterboo in this ball game. You got to get some help from the outside targets. Xavier Gilroy. I'm going to target you, young man, for a reason here. On the season, 19 receptions, 320 yards, almost 17 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. Somehow, some way, you're going to have to get loose in this Longhorn secondary and make a difference in this ball game. It's going to be up to your offensive coordinators to scheme up some stuff in this ball game. Going to talk about ways to get Cam Scatterboo the ball that doesn't just require him getting it as a running back here in just a moment. The key players in this matchup. Let's start with Texas. And let's just go with their 2 top running backs here. Trey Wisner, 191 carries, 973 yards on the ground, 5.1 yards per carry. 5 rushing touchdowns, along with Jaden Blue. You heard in the intro how well he did in the first round. Going to need another big-time performance from him in this ballgame. 126 carries on the season, 710 yards on the ground, 5.6 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns. For Arizona State, they got a Scatterboo, and you don't. Cameron Scatterboo, 263 carries, 1,568 yards on the ground, 6.0 yards per carry, 19 rushing touchdowns. Folks, if it wasn't for Ashton Genty this year, this young man may have been your Doak Walker Award winner as the best running back in college football. Sam Levitt, got to use your arm and legs in this ball game. 97 carries, 383 yards, 3.9 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Let's talk about the wide receivers in this matchup, starting with Texas. Matthew Golden, 49 receptions, 787 yards, receiving 16.1 yards per reception, 8 touchdowns, averages about 56 yards per game receiving. Tight end Gunnar Helm, 55 receptions, 688 yards, 12.5 yards per reception, 6 touchdowns, averages about 49 yards per game. And then Isaiah Bond, 33 receptions, 532 yards, 16.1 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns. He averages about 44 yards per game through the air. Without their big play, Jordan Tyson, 70 receptions, over 1,100 yards receiving, 92 yards per game is what he averages in 10 touchdowns. Folks, that leaves the production quite thin as far as their top 3 available wide receivers. Let's start with running back. That's right, running back. Cam Scatterbull, 37 receptions, 506 yards receiving, 13.7 yards per reception. So you want to get this big fella out in space. That's what I was referring to earlier. It's not just going to be his rushing yards. It's going to be what his total yards in this ball game. If he can get, when you combine his rushing and receiving, that number over 150 yards in this game, we got some opportunities here. He averages 42 yards receiving per game. Xavier Gilroy. You want to know why I mentioned him just a few moments ago? This is why. That 27 yards per game receiving, he's got to double that and maybe just a little bit more in this contest. And then Kamon Meteor, 29 receptions, 290 yards, 5 touchdowns. Gonna have to get a big chunk play from him in this contest. Let's talk about the key factors to watch. Jordan Tyson's absence, it significantly weakens this Arizona State passing attack, putting added pressure on Scatterbull and Gilroy to step up big time in the passing game in this contest. When we talk about turnover differential, Texas has a +7 in the turnover differential. Arizona State, significantly better at a +14. That's third best in the nation. They're going to need to force Ewers into a couple of turnovers in this ball game if they're going to remain connected in this contest. And then finally, it's something that I'm always going to talk about, and it's going to be something that I continue to highlight here, and that is third down conversions. Both teams have been very solid converting on third downs. Arizona State, almost 50% third down conversions. Texas, 46%. When we look at what their defense allows, Arizona State's defense allows their opponents to convert about almost 39%, while Texas significantly better at 26%. Something to keep in mind here in this contest. All right, coaching breakdown. Let's start with Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian. Since the beginning of last season, and now we have almost 2 years of full data, 24-4, 86% win rate. In one-score games, Sark is, make sure I'm looking at this correctly, he's coached in 7 one-score games, 4 wins, 3 losses. And against quality opponents, 19 games, He's 15 wins, 4 losses, almost a 79% win rate there. As far as going for it on fourth down, you would think that Sark, being an offensive-minded coach, would be a lot more aggressive. Our numbers have shown that he's nearly not as aggressive as you would think he is, going for it on fourth downs at about 13.7% of the time. That's about middle of the pack for coaches. Now, his conversion rate, and this is something that I'm going to talk about here. He's converting only 59% on fourth down attempts. 13 conversions, 22 attempts. He's going up against a stop unit there for Arizona State that allows their opponents to convert 50% of the time. 11 out of 22. Now let's talk about Kenny Dillingham, because Kenny has been one of the more aggressive head coaches. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Started off rough first year, picked up the wins here in his second year. So his overall record since the start of last season, 14-11. In one-score games, he's 7-4, 64% win rate. And then record against quality opponents, 8 wins, 9 losses. Now, his fourth down aggressive rate, 20.5% of the time. So one of the more aggressive coaches in college football, 11th nationally. However, only converting 53% on fourth downs. 16 conversions, 30 attempts. Not good. And especially when you look at, Texas, opponents have converted 13 out of 25 attempts on fourth down, 52%. So both of these defenses can be had on fourth downs if you're in the right play call, in the right situation. We'll see which coaches need to make some adjustments here with the fourth down coaching adjustment. Steve Sarkisian. And we saw this in the first round. I think he's going to continue to ramp up going for it on fourth downs. Not necessarily saying that's the right call, but that's what I'm expecting. Arizona State allows 50% conversion rate on fourth down, presenting opportunities to extend drives. Now, what you don't want to do, Coach Sark, is take points off the board by not converting. So use some discretion here when going for it on fourth downs. As far as Kenny Dillingham, he's going to likely maintain his aggressive approach as well. Like I said, with Texas allowing a moderate 52% on conversion rate, this aligns with Dillingham's aggressive philosophy. And when you look at that point spread, I expect Dillingham to absolutely empty out the kitchen sink in this ball game going for it on fourth downs. Let's talk about some quick final coaching notes here, as I've kind of touched on all 4 coordinators in this ball game. The matchup between Texas offensive coordinator Kyle Flood against Arizona State's defensive coordinator Brian Ward in this ball game. I got it. Not blitz as much in this ball game. And I got to make sure, if I am Brian Ward in this contest, I got to make Quinn Ewers beat me. Crazy to say that out loud, but I can't let these running backs go off in this ball game, and Trey Washner and Jaden Blue. I got to limit the run game and force Texas to beat me through the air. If Quinn Ewers can play a perfect game through the air, I'm willing to live with that. Because with him having 10 INTs, 2.7% of his passes have ended in an interception. I would rather go down that way than go down letting these running backs absolutely dictate the pace and play of this game. Let's flip it over for Marcus Arroyo and going up against a very sound Pete Kowakowski. I'm going to test this Texas rush defense as far as how they want to tackle. Texas has not faced a power back like Cam Scatterboo all year long. I'm going to test them early just to see if they're going to be willing to come up and absolutely tackle, because what we saw in the Big 12 title game with Iowa State, there was a lot of kind of trying to shoulder tackle. Well, you're not going to shoulder tackle a guy who reminds me so much of Mike Allstat, former Purdue and Tampa Bay running back at the NFL level. You're just not going to knock this guy off of his platform with a shoulder. First guy's got to get there, wrap him up. Second and third guy has to get there and put him on the ground. I don't know how much Texas has tackled in the last month of the season. So facing a big-time physical running back like Cam Scatterboo is going to test out that theory in this ballgame. And then I got to tell my quarterback, Sam Levitt, you're going to see some very tight coverages, but you got to put the ball on the wide receiver and not in harm's way. We have to finish every drive with a kick. Learn that from Coach Parcells. Either a field goal try, an extra point, or a punt. Cannot have any turnovers in this ball game. Got to keep it clean in this contest. And that is 2 games down. We got 2 games to go, folks. Let's get to it here. And this is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage game of the week. We still got one more game to come up. We'll talk about that game coming up. Folks, it is the Sugar Bowl. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish and hunker down in the Georgia Bulldogs. The Sugar Bowl offers us a electrifying clash between 2 of the nation's top programs, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Georgia Bulldogs. Both teams are defined by strong defenses and hopefully powerful running attacks, and the pedigree of 2 emerging coaches. Kirby Smart, already a godfather in the coaching profession with 2 national titles. Marcus Freeman looks to try to join him, winning the Irish's first national title since Lou Holtz back in 1988. It's going to set up to be a very big-time matchup. However, we got 2 significant injuries that will heavily influence the outcome of this matchup. Georgia will be without their quarterback, Carson Beck, while Notre Dame is missing defensive stalwart Raleigh Mills. Both absences could tilt key aspects of this game. Winner moves on to the semifinals. Loser left with a lot of disappointment here in this matchup. Let's head down to beautiful New Orleans, Louisiana. Laissez-le ton roulette, my folks. Let's get it. Let's start with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. The Irish comes in averaging 39.3 adjusted points per game. That's 4th best in the nation. Their passing game, 191 yards passing per game, 93rd in the nation. But what they do bolster is a powerful rushing attack, 245 yards on the ground. That's 5th best in the nation. We know who leads this attack for Notre Dame. The law firm of Love, Leonard, and Price. Running back, quarterback, and backup running back there. They're going to be going up against a Georgia stop unit that has absolutely been stingy since Kirby Smart got back to his alma mater in Athens. 13.1 points per game allowed, 5th best in the nation. Folks, you're not getting a lot of yards, whether it's through the air or on the ground, on this Georgia Bulldog defense. 168 yards per game passing, allowed, 14th best in the nation. And folks, one of the best stop units on the ground that you're going to find in America. 110 yards adjusted rushing yards per game allowed, 4th best in the nation. Let's talk about this Bulldog offense. As we talked about it, missing your quarterback. So these numbers are definitely going to be impacted without Carson at the helm there for Georgia. 36 points per game, 12th best in the nation, 318 yards passing per game, 5th best in the nation. And something that I've harped on all year long, this is probably the worst rushing Georgia attack I've seen in almost 4 decades. 150 yards per game on the ground, 87th in the nation. You're used to having one Georgia tailback average almost that per game. That's the entire Georgia rushing attack. They're going up against a Notre Dame defense that's going to be missing their big horse in Raleigh Mills. Folks, I can't overemphasize how much missing their one of their best defensive linemen, also their leading sacker on that Irish defense. 14.7 points per game allowed in this by this Irish defense, 9th best in the nation. 168 yards is what they allow through the air, 16th best. Rush defense that is good, but not great. 135 yards per game on the ground is what they allow. 33rd best in the nation. Let's talk about the quarterback matchups here. Let's start with Notre Dame. Quarterback Raleigh Mills, transfer quarterback from Duke University. 217 completions, 325 attempts, 67% completion percentage, 2,293 yards through the air, 17 touchdowns, 6 INTs. Do not really love that touchdown to INT ratio for a quarterback there with this kind of ground game. 7.1 yards per attempt. Folks, to call that pedestrian is an insult to everything that has ever been pedestrian in life. That is god awful. 10.6 yards per pass completion. Okay, let's put a big circle around that number right now. 10.6 yards per completion. You have no explosiveness at the wide receiver spot when you're averaging that kind of production. And for Notre Dame, this has been a recurring theme here for at least the last 2 decades. Yes, I know that they've had a couple of wide receivers that could stretch you vertically, and Will Fuller. Okay, but 10.6 yards per completion, absolutely pathetic. Not going to sugarcoat that. 176 yards per game passing with a quarterback rating of 139.6. Wow. All right, let's talk about what Georgia is missing in Carson Beck. 290 completions, 448 attempts, 65% completion percentage, 3,485 yards, 28 touchdowns, 12 INTs. We talked about it. Man, he was turning the ball over more than Oprah likes to give away things on a show. You get a turnover. You get a turnover. Everybody gets a turnover from Carson Beck. 7.8 yards per attempt is what he averaged, but 12 yards per completion. Now that was a little bit better. You want to see that number around 13, but 12, not embarrassing. Now, stepping in, Gunnar Stockton, limited action. Why? I don't know. But very pedestrian numbers here, so we're not going to extrapolate a lot from them. 25 completions, 32 attempts, 206 yards of passing, no touchdowns, 1 INT. Now, because he came in mop-up duty, I'm not going to over-criticize his production because he wasn't expected to go in the ball game. Now, that's a problem for offensive coordinator Mike Bobo in not having your backup quarterback ready to go in and execute at a high level. We'll talk about Mike Bobo here in just a moment. Defensive coordinator for the Bulldogs in Glenn Schumann. For Notre Dame, offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock in his third stint there with the Fighting Irish. Last time we saw him, he was leading Jaden Daniels to a Heisman Trophy there in Baton Rouge as their play caller. And, of course, Al Golden, defensive coordinator for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Okay, let's get to it here. And for Mike Denbrock, offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, his challenge, make sure Leonard is able to stay on schedule, because if we go back and look at the playoff game with Indiana, because not that I'm comparing Indiana's defense to Georgia. In no universe, if I'm ever going to make that comparison, let's just take a look at weather aside. He was 20 for 34, completed less than 60% of his passes for 215 yards. However, when I go back and look at that matchup, 40 of those yards came on, I had Riley Leonard's numbers with Curtis Rourke. Apologize for that. So here's Riley Leonard's numbers against Indiana. 23 for 32, 201 yards, 6.3 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 INT. Folks, 44 of those yards came on 1 passing attempt to Jordan Faison there. Outside of that, Notre Dame could not do anything in the passing game. And before you say it because they had control of this game and they were just dominating on the ground, I'm going to say that is a flat out misstatement. Notre Dame in that ball game against Indiana had 35 rushing attempts for 193 yards. Folks, 118 of those yards came on 2 rushing attempts. The 20-yard run by Price, and of course the 98-yard touchdown run by Jordan Love. You take those 2 plays out, Notre Dame could not run the ball on Indiana. And now you're putting them up against Georgia in this contest. To quote the late great Keith Jackson, whoa Nelly. All right, now for Mike Bobo. Oof. What is your responsibility coming up? Because the last time we saw you was in the SEC title game when you lost your quarterback. Let's just go back and look at that ball game, because gritty and gutty defensive performance. But when I look at what Gunnar Stockton did in that ball game, in perfect weather conditions against a really good defense there in Texas, Gunnar Stockton was 12 for 16 for 71 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt. Look, Georgia's wide receivers may be the worst in the playoffs remaining. and next to them may be Notre Dame. Both teams absolutely have no playmakers on the outside, whether it's the wide receiver position or the tight end position. Both of these offenses are going to be very limited as far as what they can do in this ball game. So what is the challenge for Mike Bobo? In Beck's absence, he's got to adjust his offensive strategy. And that means he's got to lean on a running game that is maybe the worst run game that we've seen from the Georgia Bulldogs in 3 decades. And you're going up against a defensive coordinator in Al Golden that knows how to handle one-dimensional offenses. Same can be said about Glenn Schumann there for Georgia. So I'm expecting a very defensive matchup in this ball game. Let's talk about the key players here. Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame, 142 carries, 1,057 yards rushing, 7.4 yards per carry, 16 rushing touchdowns. When you sub him out, you sub in Jadarian Price, 100 carries, 683 yards, 6.8 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns. And then, of course, Riley Leonard, more effective as a runner than he is as a thrower. 135 carries, 751 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, but 15 rushing touchdowns. So down by the goal line, you got to absolutely have somebody keying on Leonard and somebody more than likely keying on one of those running backs. I think Georgia may have a all-American type safety that can do that. Talk about that here later. Georgia, you're going to have to lean on your 2 tailbacks in Nate Frazier, 129 carries, 634 yards, 4.9 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns. And Trevor Etienne, 111 carries, 571 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. Let's talk about the mediocre wide receiver play for both of these teams. Bo Collins, 34 receptions for Notre Dame, 445 yards, receiving 12.4 yards per reception, 2 touchdowns. Jaden Gatehouse, 27 receptions, 353 yards, receiving 13.1 yards per reception, has 1 touchdown. And finally, Mitchell Evans, 31 receptions, 289 yards, 9.3 yards per reception, 3 touchdowns. For Georgia, Arian Smith, 47 receptions, 750 yards, 16 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. Dominic Lovett, believe they got him out of transfer portal. Was supposed to be a big-time playmaker. Have not seen that. 56 receptions, 571 yards, 10.2 yards per reception, 6 TDs. And then finally, Dylan Bell, 37 receptions, 433 yards, 11.7 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. What are the key factors for me in this ball game? It's got to start with the absence of Carson Beck. Mike Bobo. What's behind Gunnar Stockton is scary. So you got to be very judicial if you're going to run this kid at all in this ball game, because if he goes down, there are going to be calls for literally your head in this ball game. So Gunnar Stockton legs have to be with a caveat of either get out of bounds or get down. You do not take that knockout shot like you took in the SEC title game against Texas, unless it's the fourth quarter and we got to get a first down or a touchdown. Other than that, get down or get out of bounds. And for Notre Dame, it's not will you miss Raleigh Mills, it's how big you're going to miss him. In a game like this, where you're going to need to put pressure on the Georgia offense, where's your pass rush going to come from? Howard Cross just working his way back, even missing 2 months of the season. He was their second leader in sacks on the season. Folks, this Notre Dame defense cannot get pressure on the quarterback. That is just an absolute fact. Here's Notre Dame's production on the season. They have 33 sacks. 7.5 of those come from Mills. We know he's out. Cross, who missed almost 2 months, had 4. If you look down the rest of their roster, nobody has more than 3.5 sacks on the year. Folks, Notre Dame's played 13 games now, and nobody has more than 3.5 sacks. If you thought I was critical of Ohio State's lack of ability to get a pass rush, Notre Dame would kill to have either Jack Sawyer or JT Tulamolo on their roster right now, because this is not what you want to go up against. Now, here's what we've seen from the Georgia Bulldogs over the last couple of weeks. Let's just talk about the rushing numbers here. Georgia in the SEC title game against a really good Texas run defense had 37 rushing attempts for 141 yards. Now, that's not great numbers, but it's about the attempts, and for me, it's about the willingness to stick with the run game. 3.8 yards per attempt. Folks, Georgia got back one of the best guards in America in Tate Rutledge. You're going to see if Mike Bobo is a competent offensive coordinator. Wherever Howard Cross is lined up on the D-line, I'm running a two-man blocking attack on him. If he lines up in the interior, I'm taking the center and the guard, whichever guard it is, and I'm double teaming him, and I'm creating a running lane for one of these running backs. And I'm telling my running back, do not try to dance around, do not try to juke. One cut up the field and go. This is the old Mike Shanahan ground game. You see it with his son Kyle there with the San Francisco 49ers. I saw it with Denver when he was winning back-to-back Super Bowls there with a former Georgia Bulldog there in the background, and Mr. Davis there, Hall of Fame running back there. This is what you're telling the Georgia running backs in this ball game. One cut, get behind that big offensive line and just get 4, 5, 6 yards per carry. We're going to make Notre Dame submit to our will in this ball game. Now, for Notre Dame, you're going up against, well, let's take a look at Notre Dame's schedule here and see what's the best defense they've faced all year. Folks, you got to go back to week 1 when they faced another team from the Southeastern Conference, and that is the Texas A&M Aggies. So what did Notre Dame do in that ball game against Texas? Well, let's take a look and see what we got here. Notre Dame against Texas A&M back early in the season. Notre Dame struggled on third downs, 2 for 12 on third down conversions. When you're one-dimensional, it's really hard to stay on schedule. Now, A&M gave up in this contest 198 yards rushing on 34 attempts, almost 6 yards per rushing attempt. Folks, if Notre Dame gets 200 yards rushing in this ball game, Notre Dame will advance to the semifinals to play whomever comes out of the other side of the bracket. They're going to go up against a defense where Malachi Starks, the safety for Georgia, him and Xavier Watts, two of the best safeties left in the college football playoffs. I expect Malachi Starks to be in the box as the 8th defender for 90% of this ball game. Glenn Schumann is one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. I say it constantly. Al Golden right there. Jim Knowles for Ohio State. We'll talk about him here in just a moment. 3 of the best defensive coordinators in college football remain in these playoffs. I expect Starks in the box to make sure that he is spying. I think I would use him as a spy on Riley Leonard. And then I'm probably going to use Smoke Munden to spy whichever of the running backs. So we're going to play a little bit of triangle in 2. Another basketball term as I get ready to cover the SEC basketball coming up here later on this week. Box and 2 defense. 2 men play man-to-man. The other 3 play a triangle zone. So for a defensive side of breakdown, when you have one guy dedicated to the running back, one guy dedicated to the quarterback, you don't have to worry about the Notre Dame wide receivers. You're just going to let them get manned up with your cornerbacks because your athletes at corner are better than their wide receivers. Now I have all eyes as far as my safety, my defensive line, and my linebackers focusing on the running attack. I'm going to do what Texas A&M didn't do, and I'm going to force Notre Dame to beat me left-handed because if I look at Riley Leonard's numbers in that game against A&M, he was 18 for 30, 158 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt, no touchdowns in that ball game. Now, A&M gave up 2 long runs in that ball game. Price had a 47-yard run, and Love had almost a 30-yard run in that contest. I'm not going to allow Notre Dame, if I'm Georgia, to beat me one-dimensional. That would be an insult for Kirby Smart. If I trace Kirby Smart's lineage back to his coaching tree, he's learned defenses under Nick Saban, spent almost a decade with Nick as his defensive coordinator. Nick learned under Bill Belichick, arguably one of the 3 best defensive minds to have ever coached in the National Football League. Belichick learned under Parcells. Him and Parcells won 2 Super Bowls in the late 80s with the New York Football Giants. They have been building defenses to stop rushing attacks for over 40 years. You better believe that Kirby has had time to put together a game plan along with Glenn Schumann to stop this rushing attack for the Fighting Irish. Now, I talked about Al Golden. What is Al Golden going to do in this ball game? Quite simply, he's going to blitz the you-know-what out of Gunnar Stockton. He's going to come from all different angles, all different platforms, trying to make sure that this kid does not have a clean pocket to throw from. If I'm Al Golden, I'm going to force the Georgia Bulldogs to throw for over 300 yards in this ball game and beat me that way. If the story coming out of this ball game is Gunnar Stockton threw for 280 yards, 3 touchdowns in this ball game, Georgia will move on. If Gunnar Stockton has anything less than 200 yards passing, that's going to be a very significant problem for Georgia in this contest. Let's talk about the coaching matchup here because it's very significant. And before I do, let me give one more stat here that is absolutely mandatory. When we talk about turnover differential, Notre Dame is one of the best teams as far as forcing turnovers and not turning the ball over. Matter of fact, they're the best in the country, a plus 16 turnover differential. Georgia, they're flat. They're turning the ball over as much as they're forcing turnovers. Georgia has to play a clean sheet, to borrow a soccer reference. No turnovers. You turn the ball over against this Notre Dame Fighting Irish team, set them up in very short field position, it could be good night to the Georgia Bulldogs. All right, the coaching matchup. Let's start with Marcus Freeman. Since the start of last year, Coach Freeman is 21-4, 84% win rate. He is 2-3 in one-score games. Don't really love that, and against quality opponents, he's 8-3. So about 73% there. As far as going for it on fourth down, under Mike Denbrock, they've been a little bit more aggressive. Going for it on fourth down 18.5% of the time, 16th most aggressive in that category. For Kirby Smart, two-time national champion, head coach there at the University of Georgia. Since the start of last year, he's 23-3. Outside of Alabama, this man is about as money as E.F. Hutton. 88% win rate. In one-score games, he's 5-2, 71%. And against quality opponents, 15-3. Like I said, Kirby Smart knows how to get it done, regardless of what coaching scenario it is. Now, Kirby is going to be conservative by nature. 14.4% is what he goes for it on fourth downs. About 61st as far as the aggressive ranking goes. I want to bear these numbers out as I give the coaching recommendation here. So let's go to the fourth down coaching adjustments. Marcus Freeman needs to increase the aggressiveness for 2 reasons. One, how well his team does in that scenario. 19 conversions, 25 attempts. 76% is what they convert on third down. And Georgia has given up some fourth downs. 16 conversions on 29 attempts. So the opponents for Georgia converting at a 55% success rate. If the opportunity presents itself to sustain a drive, Marcus Freeman, go for it on fourth down. Kirby Smart, I'm going to recommend that you maintain your conservative approach. Now, it's not because you're not good on converting fourth downs, which you are extremely good at. 17 conversions, 22 attempts, 77%. However, Notre Dame allows their opponents to convert at a 34% clip. 12 conversions, 35 attempts. Now, with the absence of Raleigh Mills, Kirby, I'm going to do something that maybe goes counter to your nature. If it's 4th and 1 and you're on the outskirts of making a field goal, Kirby Smart, go for it. You line up behind Tate Rutledge and you run behind one of the best offensive guards in college football. Kirby, don't be afraid to lean on your ground game in this contest with a key cog missing for Notre Dame. We talked about the betting lines for this as we look at the big board. The Georgia Bulldogs currently sit with a 1 point, they're favored by 1. So that number has come down despite Georgia getting 80% of the handle, 69% of the money. Somebody just dropped a significant amount on Notre Dame to win this game outright. Wow. That just came across my my feed there. Significant bet on the Irish to win outright. Okay, thank you for that information. Folks, we ran 10,000 simulations for this ball game. It's about as even as you would expect the point spread to be in this contest. We've given you the coaching breakdowns for what each of these offensive and defensive coordinators need to do in this ball game. I expect a very low-scoring, tightly contested ball game. Whichever team makes the fewest mistakes in this ball game will advance in the college football playoffs. We talk about what I always talk about on these shows, third down conversions. Georgia converts on third down 46% of the time, Notre Dame 40%. As far as the defensive conversions, Notre Dame allows their opponents to convert on third downs 37% of the time. Georgia only allows their opponents to convert 26% of the time on third downs. Talk about two fantastic stop units. The key in this ball game, turnovers. And I'm going to highlight this because it is significant. Kicking in climate controlled conditions will favor the team with the best special teams. Notre Dame makes 71% of their field goals, Georgia 91%. If this is a close ball game, big advantage to Georgia in the field goal kicking game. Folks, that leaves us one game left, and it is the Matlock and Julie Vols balls to the wall game of the week. And folks, as always, I love highlighting my good friends Matlock and Julie Vols in the balls to the wall game of the week. You can find Matlock and Julie Vols on Twitter at Matlock850 Radio, and you can also stream their show currently weekdays 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time on wearesportsradio.com. You can catch me on 2 segments. Change up this week because of the holiday. You can catch me coming up on Monday at the top of the 5 p.m. Central Time slot, and again on Friday in my normal slot. So, Matlock, Julie Vols, balls to the wall, game of the week. And folks, we head out to beautiful Pasadena, California in the rematch of the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Oregon Ducks. I want to say a hello to my good friend Amber, big time Buckeye fan, listening to the podcast, always shares and retweets all of the fantastic content we put out. Amber, you know how much I and our entire team love you, and thank you for all of your support. Folks, let's get into it because we got a lot to cover and we're not going to waste any time. So let's get to it. Folks, this is the Rose Bowl. This is the granddaddy of them all. And it kicks off with what would have been a matchup between the Pac-12 champion and the Big Ten champion in the old version of the Rose Bowl. Big Ten versus Pac-12. This is now a conference rematch in the Big Ten. The Oregon Ducks, the number one overall rated team in college football, looks to advance to the semifinals against the Buckeyes, who are looking for a little bit of revenge. The Ohio State Buckeyes, off of that major win at home last weekend against Tennessee, looks to continue on in the college football playoff. Both teams are elite on offense, disciplined on defense, and both have championship aspirations. Ohio State's balanced attack on offense will face a challenge slowing down that Oregon powerhouse offense. Ohio State's defense will need to step up and give a much better showing than what we saw early on in the season, as they were in Autzen and gave up over 30 points in that contest. Only time that they've really been dominated like that all season. This Ohio State Buckeye offense is no slouch whatsoever, as they have an elite budding star in Jeremiah Smith. Folks, I haven't wanted to say it all season, but that young man is Julio Jones coming out of high school, going to the University of Alabama. He is already a grown man matching up against young men at the college level. God bless you for having to deal with him for 2 more years. But this offense needs to run through Travion Henderson. That talented tailback there for the Buckeyes needs to go off in this ball game. Kind of similar to what we've seen Ohio State running backs do in the past, with one Ezekiel Elliott, who led the Buckeyes to their last national championship, and one Eddie George, Heisman Trophy winner there for the Buckeyes. I know Quinshon Judkins is a talented tailback, but folks, Travion Henderson is the straw that stirs this whole thing up there in Columbus. Get that young man the ball like you did last week. You got an opportunity in this ball game. Folks, let's not waste any time. Let's get to the matchup. Let's get it, baby. Ohio State's offense comes in averaging 36.6 points per game, 8th best in the country. Will Howard leads this passing attack with 267 yards through the air, 18th best in the nation, and a ground game with those two talented tailbacks in Judkins and Henderson, averaging 188 yards per game rushing, 39th best in the country. They're going to go up against an Oregon defense that we're going to spend some time talking about. This Oregon defense allows 15.2 points per game, 10th best in the nation, 152 yards passing allowed for the Ducks, 5th best in the nation, 131 yards per game on the ground, 26th best in the nation. This Duck passing game led by Dylan Gabriel, 36 points per game, 11th best in the nation, 275 yards per game passing, 16th best in the nation, 199 yards per game on the ground, 26th best in the nation. They're going up against a Buckeye stop unit that has just absolutely been chef's kiss. I left out Jim Knowles, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football, bar none. His unit, once again, 10 points per game allowed, best in the nation. 141 yards passing per game allowed, second best in the nation. And a rush unit that allows 113 yards per game on the ground, 8th best in the country. Folks, Jim knows how to coach defenses, and he's got some toys to play with. We're going to be talking about all of those young men here in just a moment. So what do we want to see from this matchup? Because let's go back to early in the season, as Ohio State lost that ball game 32-31. And we're not going to lay it on the feet of Will Howard not sliding early enough. This game came down to a couple of things. Ohio State could not convert on third downs, as they were 4 for 12 in that matchup. Oregon was 6 for 14. You wonder why I keep harping on third down conversions? If you're good on third downs and you're not losing the turnover battle, you usually win a lot of ball games. Ohio State turned the ball over twice. Should have been 3 turnovers had Dan Lanning had his headlights on and called a timeout, forcing a review on that first drive by Ohio State when it would have been considered either a fumble or interception. Ohio State goes on, gets a touchdown. Those are 7 points that Ohio State had no business even getting. Problem with Dan Lanning on that. We talked about it. 2 turnovers. The penalties for Ohio State in that contest. 8 penalties for 70 yards. Oregon only had 3 penalties. Now, this was an offensive explosion all the way around. Ohio State was 28 for 35, 326 yards passing, 9.3 yards per attempt. That's video game stuff. They got it done on the ground, 33 rushing attempts, 141 yards, 4.3 yards per carry on the ground. Folks, Oregon was also video game numbers. 23 for 34, 341 yards passing, 10 yards per pass attempt. That's stupid good. 31 rushing attempts, 155 yards, 5 yards per rushing attempt. Everybody ate in this ball game. Henderson, 10 carries, 87 yards. Jeremiah Smith, 9 receptions, 100 yards, 1 touchdown. Emeka, 10 receptions, 93 yards. G. Scott, the tight end that we've kind of seen pick up his play a little bit, 3 receptions for 46 yards. For the Ducks, Jordan James, grown man game, 23 carries, 115 yards. Evan Stewart absolutely ate up this Ohio State secondary, 7 receptions, 149 yards, burning them deep with that 69-yard pass play that went for the touchdown. And then Tess Johnson, 7 receptions, 75 yards. Also that big 48-yard pass play that he had in the contest. Terrence Ferguson, big game, 4 receptions, 63 yards. And then Trayshawn Holden had a 32-yard reception in this ball game. Folks, defense was optional in this ball game. And this is something that both teams better make big-time adjustments on. We talked about it. Jim Knowles, defensive coordinator for Ohio State. Tosh Lapoy, defensive coordinator for the Ducks. Let's also talk about the offensive coordinators in this ball game. With Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator for Ohio State, and Will Stein, offensive coordinator for Oregon. We talked about the masterclass that Chip Kelly put on last weekend against Tennessee. Going to need a repeat performance in this ball game just from a play calling and design standpoint. Thought Chip heavily criticized by us here, and rightfully so, but you give credit when it's absolutely deserved. That's what great analysts who take pride in their work do in these kind of situations. Great job by Chip against Tennessee in that ball game. We had no complaints on the review show on that Sunday talking about the masterclass that he put on. Will Stein, you're going to need to duplicate that similar performance you had against Ohio State early in the season. Putting up 30 points against the Buckeyes, not a small feat when you consider the next team that had the largest scoring output against Ohio State. If I'm looking at this correctly, it would be a tie between Tennessee and Nebraska, who scored 17 points. So you nearly doubled their highest game allowed there. So Will Stein, you're going to need another masterclass here in this ball game. Let's talk about the quarterbacking matchup here. For Ohio State, Will Howard, beautiful game a week and a half ago against Tennessee. On the season, Will Howard, 251 completions, 343 attempts, 73% completion percentage, 3,171 yards passing, 29 touchdowns, 9 INTs. We got to make sure you take care of the ball in this ball game. We talked about it. You potentially could have had more turnovers in that ball game against Oregon. Got to make sure you take care of the ball, young fella. 9.2 yards per passing attempt. Now, that very, very good. 12.6 yards per completions. Once again, very good in that area. 244 yards passing per game. Complete quarterback rating of 173.5. Fantastic there. Dylan Gabriel, not to be outdone, 297 completions, 403 attempts. Also 73.2% completion percentage, 3,558 yards, 28 touchdowns, 6 INTs. Now, he got those INTs cleaned up from early on in the season. Dylan Gabriel's been absolutely phenomenal, and that's why he was a Heisman finalist there. 8.8 yards per passing attempt. Very, very solid in that area. 12 yards per completion, also very solid. 274 yards passing per game, 166.6 quarterback rating. Fantastic job by both of those young men. Let's talk about what the offensive and defensive matchup from the coordinator spots must do to kind of throw these quarterbacks off their game, something we didn't see in their first matchup. For Tosh Lapoy, going up against Will Howard and Chip Kelly. The challenge is Howard must maintain his elite efficiency while avoiding those costly turnovers against this Oregon opportunistic defense. Talked about how critical those turnovers were in the first matchup. Got to avoid those in this matchup. For Jim Knowles, Buckeye defensive coordinator, going up against Will Stein and Dylan Gabriel, his challenge is he must make sure that Gabriel is not capitalizing on those explosive plays. And Ohio State has got to play better coverage on the back end. It starts with the pass rush. We saw Sawyer and JT absolutely go off a week and a half ago against Tennessee. Going to need a similar type performance there from those two edge rushers, helping out those secondary players, because if the quarterback doesn't have time to throw, hard to complete passes there. So with Dylan Gabriel also being a shorter quarterback, if you can't get to the quarterback, you got to get your hands up and make sure you dirty that windshield for Dylan Gabriel in this ball game. Jim Knowles got to make some key adjustments in this contest. Let's talk about the key players there for both of these teams. And we're going to start with the tailbacks, because we have three fantastic backs that can get in the dot and can get going. Let's start with the Buckeyes. Quinshon Judkins. Since coming over from Ole Miss, this young man has absolutely shown himself quite well there in Columbus. 157 carries, 839 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. Travion Henderson, I said he's the straw that stirs this entire drink. Needs a big-time game here for the Buckeyes. 118 carries, 831 yards, 7 yards per carry. He's the home run threat, 8 touchdowns on the ground as well. For the Ducks, Jordan James, 226 carries, 1,253 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, 15 rushing touchdowns. And also Noah Whittington, 112 carries, 537 yards, 4.8 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Let's talk about the wide receivers, because, folks, we got some phenomenal wide receivers in this matchup. Jeremiah Smith, Julio Jones 2.0, baby. 63 receptions, 1,037 receiving yards, 16.5 yards per catch, 12 touchdowns. Future NFL wide receiver in Emeka Egbuka, 65 receptions, 834 yards, 12.7 yards per reception, 9 touchdowns. Also going to mention Carnell Tate, 42 receptions, 601 yards, 14.3 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. For the Ducks, led by Tess Johnson, 78 receptions, 864 yards, 11.1 yards per reception, 10 touchdowns. Evan Stewart, 48 receptions, 613 yards, 12.8 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns. And finally, Trayshawn Holden, 38 receptions, 602 yards, 15.8 yards per reception, 3 big touchdowns. What's the key factors to watch in this ball game? We talked about it. Battle of the trenches. Ohio State's offensive line must protect Will Howard against Oregon's aggressive defensive front seven that Tosh Lapoy is going to look to unleash in this ball game. Conversely, Oregon's offensive line must create running lanes for Jordan James in this matchup, and we may see a little bit of running from Dylan Gabriel in this matchup. Key number 2, explosive plays. We talked about that first matchup. There were explosive plays all over that field. I'm surprised that stadium was still standing after that offensive explosion. Defense wasn't optional. Defense was not even present. Both teams excel in creating big plays. Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith, and Oregon, Tess Johnson. Whichever wide receiver puts up those explosive plays in this game will be pivotal to whoever wins this rematch. And then turnover differential. When we look at the turnover differential, slight edge to the Ducks here as they are +6 in turnover differential, 30th in the nation. Ohio State +2. The emphasis that needs to be on a mistake-free ball game. Whichever team wins the third down conversions, wins the turnover margin, will come away with a big-time win here in this contest. Let's talk about the stat that, folks, that I'm always going to highlight, and you know where I'm going. Third down conversions. Ohio State's offense converts 42% on third downs. Oregon, 49%. As far as defensive third down conversions allowed, Ohio State allows their opponents to convert at 33%, Oregon 29.7%. So both teams can be elite on playing third down conversions, have to play better on first and second down to get off the field on third downs. Let's talk about the coaching matchup. Let's start with Ohio State head coach Ryan Day. Since the start of last season, 25 games, he's 22-3, 88% win rate. In one-score games, Day is 4-3. And against quality opponents, he's 8-3, 73% win rate. For Dan Lanning, over that same time period, 26 games, he's 24-2, 92% win rate. In one-score contest, he's 5-2. Those 2 losses coming against Washington last year, both in the regular season and the finale of the the Pac-12 championship game. And against quality opponents, he's 13-2. As crazy of a job that he does with some of the decision making, this man has known how to win ball games there as the head coach of the Ducks. Let's talk about fourth down aggressiveness. This is where Chip Kelly influences all over this Buckeye offense. Ohio State goes for it on fourth down 20% of the time. 14th most aggressive team in college football. Conversely, Dan Lanning and offensive coordinator Will Stiles, they go for it on fourth down about 11% of the time. One of the least aggressive head coaches as far as fourth down goes in college football. Let's get to the fourth down coaching adjustment here for both teams. Let's start with Ryan Day and his offensive coordinator Chip Kelly. With that highly aggressiveness on fourth downs, let's see how well they convert. Ohio State converts at a 69% clip. That's really impressive there. And when you look at what the Ducks allow their opponents to convert at about a 48% clip. If I'm Ryan Day and I'm Chip Kelly, I'm going to go for it on fourth down, but it's going to be dictated by game situation. What quarter and what's the score? And if we are in an offensive shootout, or are we starting to see a little bit more defense being played in this contest? Now, let's flip it over for Dan Lanning. For Dan Lanning, we're going to recommend you maintain your conservative approach. But don't be afraid of going for it on fourth down because you're converting at a 71% clip. 10 conversions, 14 attempts. But here's why I say maintain your conservative approach, because Ohio State's defense is only allowing their opponents to convert at a 38% clip, 8 out of 21 attempts. That is why I would say maintain your conservative approach. Oregon should rely on their defense to control this Ohio State offense and avoid unnecessary risk, giving this Buckeye team a short field to work with. Folks, we ran 10,000 game simulations, extremely tight. We like where our point spread sits, and we gave this out to our clients, everyone that purchased the college football playoff package, one that you can still find on our website at www.crunchtimesportsadvantage.com. Now, let's talk about some keys for both teams and all coordinators in this contest. We talked about the matchup earlier. If I am Ohio State in this matchup, I have to get my ground game going. And the reason I say that is not only because it's going to open up passing windows for all three wide receivers and the tight end, it's also because of the liability that we've seen from the Oregon Ducks on the ground against really good teams. Folks, in their 4 toughest games this year, this Oregon defense has absolutely been bloodied on the ground. 221 yards to Boise State. Ohio State got a $141. Michigan got 105. And then in the Big Ten title game against Penn State ran for 292. In those 4 games, the Ducks are giving up an average of 190 yards per game on the ground. Ohio State, let Chip be who Chip really wants to be, and that's ground and pound. That one will keep that Oregon Duck offense off the field, and 2, it will allow you to control the pace and tempo of this ball game. If I am the Oregon Ducks on offense, I have to carve up this Ohio State secondary, and I got to make sure that Dylan Gabriel is protected in the pocket. If so, my matchup with those wide receivers on the outside, we could replicate that 300-yard passing day that we had back in the beginning of the season. Folks, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark because there was a lot of great information to bring out. Want to say thank you for sticking with us for the entire show. On behalf of my fantastic team, Jennifer, Jessica, Summer, doing a fantastic job with the hosting duties. Billy, our senior handicapping analyst, who did a fantastic job of setting the table for how we needed to attack these ball games. This is Kenneth, founder and senior analyst for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. You can catch us on Google Play, Spotify, Anchor, and you can also find us on YouTube at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com and check out the website for all of our fantastic packages. Enjoy the college football playoffs kicking off on Tuesday night and then continuing on New Year's Day. Take care, everybody, and God bless.